Hey everyone, welcome to another episode on the Asian Hustle Network podcast. Today we have Jonathan Lam. Jonathan is a two-time entrepreneur, early stage investor, focusing on helping startups scale their revenue and operations. He's also a general partner at Root and Shoot Ventures. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Brian. Yeah, it's really nice to see you again. Really happy to be on the show and excited to chat about all things, revenue sharing or all things VC. So
Of
let's get started.
course, of course. As you know, we like to start with the question: Who are you, Jonathan? Where'd you grow up? What was your background like?
Great question, Brian. I was born in Toronto, born and raised till about 4 or 5. And when I was in about pre-K, that's when I made my first transition to moving to Beijing. So my family, has been in Toronto for about 30 years before that. And I guess they uprooted us as a family. And that's kind of where I spent most of my childhood up until university. And in China, it was kind of interesting, right? Because English was my first language. And Chinese was my second language, I guess. But growing up in Beijing, it felt very different, right? It was a very different identity. We went to an international school, and the interesting thing there was, in an international school, I felt like most people kind of just, went there for a few years. Whether they worked at some, corporate expat company and they left. But the great thing was, I was able to meet a lot of great lifelong friends, family and connections that I really hold dear today. Fast forward to even me being in Toronto, I have a lot of close friends around the world, and I still have heavy roots back in Beijing, which I absolutely love because I love going back there every chance I get.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's really unique background, like learning English first, then moving back to Beijing. That's crazy. What was the transition like coming back to Beijing as a native English speaker?
Luckily I was 4, but I recall the first thing I saw, like when I got to the airport, was just someone spitting on the floor, and I was like, "Oh, that's pretty cool." It was just really different. But I definitely did not speak the native language. There weren't that many expats, back in 1994, 1995. So it was a very interesting transition. I do remember, our first place. It was, we stayed in a hotel for the first month, and then eventually moved to a house. But I remember us showering in like dirty water, and this was Beijing, like for the first month or so. Um, but fast forward to today. I mean, it was crazy that we were able to kind of see that economic development. From the amount of tuk-tuks and bicycles all the way to where Beijing is today, which is a modern, developed economic powerhouse. Similar to like New York, LA, Toronto, but a lot more developed. And I loved every moment of it.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned that too, because I feel like a lot of perception of what China is kind of rural and some nice cities, some big cities. But to be honest, like if you like look into the Asian demographics, it's like these cities are super modern. Like this technology is like eons ahead. Like they have subway systems that actually make sense, right? You can get anywhere you need. It's like trying to actively push away from like cars and more towards city planning. So I'm glad you're able to mention that on the podcast too, because I don't think a lot of us realize that how developed Asia really is as a city.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Brian. Especially in the beginning, there's like over 10, maybe even like 50 million people living in Beijing, or at least the metropolitan area of Beijing. And to be able to actually like fit that many people in such a confined space. I mean, you can't have that many cars. And it was kind of interesting to see because there was that bicycle craze as well too, where they had the lifts, or the lifts of bicycles, where you're able to rent bicycles, and it was just there were just so many of them on the streets, and because it was a fast mode of transportation. Um, the subway system is very advanced, very developed. It definitely gets overcrowded sometimes as well too. So, like every metropolitan, they do have some infrastructure problems that they need to address. But it's been such an interesting development because, I mean, back when we were there from 1995 to 2000, there was no subway system. There was just taxis and bicycles and buses, and it all got built in less than 10 years for the Beijing Olympics.
Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely crazy watching like the development of not just like cities in China, but across Asia, Vietnam, Indonesia, you name it. You see all these modern cities. And I want to link it back to your experience as a founder too, right? What was your first venture? Like,
Uh,
what was it
yeah,
like going through that process? Was it in Beijing? Was it in Canada? Was it here in the States? Like, how'd you get your first idea?
Great question, Brian. Growing up in Beijing, I definitely seen it's a really different mentality than it is in Canada, and definitely see the wide contrast. Beijing on one hand, I feel it's a lot more, I'd say it's a lot more of a hustle. It's a lot more shark-like in that sense as well too. Everyone's trying to make it. Everyone's pushing themselves, everyone's grinding, everyone's working hard. And you definitely see that, in all aspects of life, right? From the expats to the students to the teachers, like everyone's studying really hard and working towards their goal. And I think that's a really common thing that's ingrained in our culture, which I found very interesting. And building being or developing that mentality, that's always what I really want to be, an operator, because I definitely saw how they kind of did it in Beijing. And coming back to Toronto, this is kind of always what I wanted to do. And the funny story, Brian, was the first thing I wanted to do actually right after I graduated university was open my own restaurant. Just because I just was always passionate about it. I love food. I love the hustle. I love working long hours. I even did a rotational program in Beijing as my first job. Just working at a Japanese restaurant, from being a line cook all the way to cutting sushi to being a waitress or a waiter, in the front, just to really get that experience. And I really enjoyed it. But, and unfortunately, that never really came to fruition. So the first company I did launch, and this is really kind of where I guess the other aspect of what I like doing was, and I launched a company called Peerfunder. And this was back in 2015. And I launched Peerfunder just because I really wanted to empower small businesses. And I thought that was really interesting because, especially in Canada, the transition, number one, from Beijing, really economic development, to all these super apps, to WeChat, coming to Canada where we're still relying on Interact e-transfer, email transfers just to pay money. Our financing system is a little outdated, a little broken. So I felt like there was a lot of innovation to be done. And, especially with small businesses, the funding options were very outdated and limited. It was really hard to get a loan from the bank. There was limited venture capital funding, debt financing, very rigid processes that, that weren't adaptive to innovation. So what we did at Peerfunder was we built this revenue share model for Main Street businesses. And I thought this was really cool because it helped them originate loans by taking a percentage of revenue. And I thought this was empowering and innovative because what we realized about most Main Street businesses is that they operate cyclically, especially during upturns and downturns. You can imagine an ice cream shop does really well in the summer, but doesn't do too well in the winter. I feel like in Canada, especially in Toronto, winter a lot of things kind of operate to a standstill just because it's so cold and snowy. Um, Whereas for most traditional fixed loans, it's rigid and it doesn't really adopt to business needs. Whereas revenue share financing was both beneficial and I just love that model, and that's what we started off launching. And we eventually pivoted not just to Main Street businesses, but to e-commerce businesses as well.
That's amazing. I mean, thank you so much for even coming up with the idea, right? I think the cool thing about finance is that it's a lot of creative finance that you can utilize, right? Except that honestly, it goes back to I don't know how the educational system is in China and Canada, but like you're not taught a lot of like deep finance things like that in the US, right? And it's like it comes down to like understanding like what you're able to work with, what's legal, what's not legal, right? And make things happen. So kind of curious too, like what was how did you end up exiting that company? Did you sell your shares? Did you step away? Did you move to the board? I think that topic is not really covered on the Asian Hustle Network podcast, and we'd like to dive deep into like the exit process of a founder.
Yeah, that's a great question, Brian. Luckily, because what we kind of did was in order to kind of venture or navigate around the regulation, obviously, issuing shares and issuing securities is a very highly regulated space. But what we found was debt financing was a little different. Private lending is definitely a lot more open. So what we did at Peerfunder is we essentially grew this to about $10 million in loan origination. So I built it from scratch, continue to raise capital from private lenders and deploy capital to Main Street businesses and and e-commerce platforms, specifically in crowdfunding campaigns. The interesting thing about the exit process here was I didn't unfortunately really have as much of an exit, whereas I was able to sunset the business. And this was kind of an interesting process to move into crypto as well too, because I was still operating that business, but I got kind of poached by another company. And this company was one of the largest physical exchanges in Canada. Crypto in 2017 was a relatively new concept. And, it was kind of a natural progression for me to kind of move there as well, too. So it was kind of a nice transition for me where I was able to sunset the business, let the loans kind of pay its course, pay its dues, and kind of just close the business like that. So in other words, it wasn't really a successful exit where I get a return on a multiple, but I was able to make my investors happy, to be able to make mainstream businesses able to fulfill their loans, and I was able to successfully transition into my next company.
Wow. I mean, thank you for covering that too. I think a lot of us always wonder about that transition phase, right? Do I sunset? Do I sell? Like how does things work out? And I'm glad that we're able to kind of briefly talk about that. But I want to hear about your second company, right? As you mentioned, there was a seamless transition over to the second one. Definitely want to hear more about that.
Yeah, yeah. So great, great question, Brian. In 2017, that's really where I began my journey into crypto. I mean, at first, I had no idea what it was. But some of my old colleagues or some people I knew for a long time, essentially poached me and enticed me to join their company. This company was growing crazy fast, and this company really had this really interesting product where they were really just launching these physical kiosks across Canada. Um, and there was only about 4 or 5 people in this company, so it was a relatively small company in the beginning when I first joined. But because of their fast growth and because crypto kind of blew up in 2017, I think it went from anywhere between, I think it was like $2,000 or $3,000 all the way up to 20 to $25,000 at one point. This was the 2017 kind of bull run. And they got a lot of attention, they got a lot of demand, and it was such an interesting business model. And the cool thing about the company like this is they're really trying to build the traditional payments or the traditional fiat on ramps and off ramps. And I thought this was really necessary because everyone talks about the picks and shovels, and these guys were doing it. Really trying to adopt or let people really adopt cryptocurrency as mainstream. And I love getting in the weeds of it. I love being an operator. I love going to stores. I love planting machines. I love trying to, like driving machines or driving trucks, to different store locations and, just physically planting the machines yourself. So I was able to kind of wear the operator hat, but, it really depends on the role that you kind of have to place, especially in startup, because you tend to wear all hats as well too. So for me, as much as I like being the operator, I really wore that finance hat as well too. So I was in charge with a lot of the accounting, a lot of finance, and especially with crypto. Like my realization was like reconciliation is a mess, and this is a problem that a lot of startups are solving today, which I'm really bullish about. But it was really interesting because using traditional, I mean, not to bore you guys, but using traditional
You're not boring us. Keep
accounting
going,
software,
man.
using traditional accounting software like QuickBooks, for instance, right? They only go up to 2 decimal points, whereas we know Bitcoin can go up to 8 decimal points. So you couldn't properly reconcile anything, using traditional accounting software. So we relied on a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of manual processes, and the really cool thing about this is like my time at LocalCoin, at Kernel, I was able to kind of see, at least sift through the BS in my opinion. And that's really the difference where I find like my view in crypto is compared to a lot of other operators out there where I'm not really focused as much on the technology, but I'm really focused on the picks and shovels because I feel like that's where the real utility and that's where the real use cases lie.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely love how you align things with your core values, right? And the things that you like to do. It's like, you know what you're good at, you know how to help the business, and you stay within those boundaries, which is a fantastic thing to have, right? So, given the state of the crypto markets right now, as we know, we're a little bit in the bearish side. What are your views on like the future of crypto?
That's a great question, Brian. So, like I've been through I mean, I'm not going to say I've been in crypto since 2012, 2013, 2014, right? I've only joined in about 2017. So I've kind of been through 2 bull runs now and 2 bearish winters now. I would consider this a crypto winter. I think we're just getting started, but we'll see. You know, I would say my views on this is, the strongest founders and the most resilient founders that build in this market will survive. And that's what I think. Like, if you're still building this market, if you're responsible to manage your cash flows, like, able to, like we look at the stories of Three Arrow Capital, of Voyager, of Celsius, right? It's just a mismanagement of their cash flow, really. But if you were able to properly manage and properly have these checks and balances, which most people don't have, you won't be able to survive this. With that being said, I'm still really bullish on the infrastructure plays, the ones that are really building crypto from the ground up, just because, look, like right now, the banking on rails and off rails are getting closer to where they need to be. But in most countries around the world, especially Southeast Asia, like they don't still have access to, to banking needs, especially if you own crypto. Right? You're still relying on OTC providers, you're still relying on under the table, and banks still heavily restrict your ability to purchase it. And I do believe that the next generation, the next wave is going to be a game changer, especially during this downturn.
Definitely. I couldn't agree more with that analysis, right? I think I'm not saying I've been through like all the market changes, but I've been through enough to see that things are going to recover, right? I think that to me there's parallels and not really parallels to the early days of the internet, right? With the internet, it's like a lot of people had doubts that whether or not this could be integrated to mainstream society, but now it is. And I feel like crypto and like NFTs and all those things is just the beginning. Like, of course, I feel like the beginning, there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of scams, right? But I think over time, it's like it's gonna mature, and we haven't given it enough time to mature yet.
I agree. I agree with that, Brian. And I do think that, look, I mean, I equate this really similarly to crowdfunding campaigns. At Peerfunder, we're able to kind of give loans. So I was able to kind of see the development of, crowdfunding campaigns, right? When you first heard about Kickstarter, an idea was able to raise you millions and millions of dollars. And, the first wave couldn't really deliver, fulfill on their promises. And, they got a lot of slack or like a lot of flack, sorry, a lot of a lot of anger towards the community. And I feel like that's really the similar thing to the first wave of the NFTs, right? They overpromise, they underdeliver at least 90% of them, let's say. But I think the next wave of NFT builders will actually think about, look, how can I show up my team? How can I provide utility? And how can I deliver on my promises? So I definitely agree with you, Brian. I think I'm excited for the future of the NFTs and the next wave of tokens.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate your energy, like talking about all these different topics, right? I feel the excitement, I feel the passion in your voice, and I do want to thank you for helping the API community, right? And for your listeners who don't know, Jonathan helped out with Gordon's birthday. So Gordon did a fundraiser for API organizations supporting representation in media, such as Gold House, Us, Cape, Hate the Virus, organizations that are supporting and uplifting the community. So thank you so much for that, Jonathan.
Thank you, Ryan. And thank you for showing support because I know you were definitely one of the sponsors as well, too. So, we're more than happy to support in any way as possible. And Brian, you're definitely leading the charge here as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I for our listeners, right? Gordon is one of our mutual friends. He's also one of the general partners of Root and Shoot Ventures with Jonathan. Tell us about Root and Shoot Ventures. Why did you guys start that? How did you guys start that? And how did you meet Gordon and your other partner?
Yeah, great question, Brian. So let's start with how we started Root and Shoot Ventures. I've known Gordon and my other partner for a long time now. So, one of the benefits of us growing up in Beijing together, despite most people kind of leaving or transitioning, in and out of Beijing, I feel like there's been just a core group of people that stayed for about 15, 16 years. And, Gordon and Mike were a part of that as well, too. So I was really fortunate to kind of grow up with them. Um, and I would say, how we started Root and Shoot Ventures was, Gordon and I were definitely, diverging paths right after, high school, university, right? He went to LA, he studied, and I went to Toronto, right? And we definitely did not work in the same industries. But the great thing is we kind of always kept in contact and we always relatively collaborated. Any advice that I needed, any advice that he needed, we definitely kept in touch because we trusted each other and we respect each other's opinions and thoughts. So we did a lot of angel investing as well. In the past. And fast forward about a year and a half ago, and that's really when we started the fund. We were like Gordon was investing a lot of deals, and I was kind of advising him. And we thought, why not transition this to a fund, right? Why not just dive heavy and just try something different, try something new? Just because we're getting a lot of deals, these are great opportunities, not just for us and for the API community, but also our network. So we thought, hey, let's start a fund. And that was it. I mean, that was really unexpected, but looking back, I don't think I would have done anything differently.
That's amazing, right? I'm really glad that you guys are able to stay in touch since your younger days in Beijing, coming to the States, coming to well, you're in Canada, coming to North America. So I really appreciate that. And what is the thesis of Root and Shoot Ventures? What do you guys invest into? What kind of founders do you look for? What kind of qualities do you look for? I know that you guys are very selective in your process. but also very endearing to the ones that you choose to invest into. So I want to hear more about that.
Oh, thanks, Brian. Yeah, yeah. So I would say we're an early stage venture fund. We mainly focus on pre-seed to seed to maybe seed extension deals. Mainly focus on US, but we will make exceptions. The initial goal for our first fund was to invest in about 100 companies spread across three different verticals. Number one is generational shift, leveling the playing field, sorry, and digital technologies. In terms of what we've done recently is we've actually recently invested in, we recently hit the 30 company target mark, which was a great success for us. And yeah, I mean, it's a pretty rigorous investment process. We can explain more in detail for sure. But in a high level summary, in the past year and a half, we've seen about, or we've evaluated over 12,000 companies. We've engaged with over 1,200 of them and invested in about 30. And for us, to go from 12,000 to 1,200 to 30, it's definitely a rigorous process.
Yeah, I can't imagine. So I want to hear more about your fundraising process too. Like, I know you mentioned earlier that you're creating something that's such a win for the community, right? Such a win for your peers, your network. I want to hear about how big is this fund, right? How'd you raise your first million? What was the struggle about raising the next and the next and the 5 to 10 to like whatever size fund you are? Because I,
Yeah,
I feel like there's not enough information about that online, and I want to make sure that if those are interested in venture capital and know how to get started.
yeah, yeah. Really great question, Brian. Number one, there raise. I mean, look, when we first started, we actually didn't even know what we were doing. I mean, that was the kind of the interesting thought, right? Because as first-time fund managers, as emerging fund managers, we were still kind of figuring things out as we went. But what I loved about what we did was, look, you need to like in order to raise your first million, you need a network. It's very similar to raising startup capital. I mean, it's no different where when you're raising a fund, you need a network of at least 100 different prospective investors. You rank them from top tier to bottom tier, and you need to go out and speak with them. And I think and that was, I know we had there will be a question later, but for first time fund managers with little track record, and the fact is like venture as an asset class is hard to understand. There was a lot of like interesting things about first joining in, right? Because what we realized was number one, the industry was a little closed off, and most large institutional managers will often ignore first time fund managers, for the first funds. So as first time emerging fund managers, we really had to depend on our network and high net worth individuals. And that's what we set out to do. And what's kind of interesting was, um, you know, getting it off the ground was difficult, right? Sometimes it felt like a lost cause because you pitched over 20 investors and it's first time fund managers, right? We have to prepare for a lot of rejection, right? You work your way through 5 meetings, through 10 meetings, just to end up getting a polite reject. And that's what we just kept pushing, right? It's just the grind. It's just a hustle. You just have to keep putting yourself out there, keep networking, and just keep building your story and keep building your thesis. I mean, I think to date we have over 25 versions of our deck, for instance. And our thesis is always evolving. But what we love about what we do is that our process and what we love pitching to our investors is that we methodically and meticulously track our portfolio and all the factors that lead up to the investment. And I think that's really important for the first time fund managers, right? It's to show growth and to tell a story. And, we want to continue to learn and get better investing.
Yeah, absolutely. Storytelling is crucial for startup founders pitching, any fund managers pitching. And I didn't catch this earlier.
Right? We're still raising capital, we're still pushing forward, and we're still kind of tracking our investments as well too. So, it
Yeah.
never stops.
Yeah, the hustle never stops. That's why you guys are on the Asian Hustle podcast. So Jonathan, so what's next for you, man? So you're a two-time founder, you're a fund manager, you're an operator. You basically did every single part of the spectrum, right? Where do you see yourself in like the next 5 to 10 years?
Oh, that's a great question, Brian. For me, I personally love investing. I love operating, but being an investor and being able to advise deals or advise companies is something I'm very passionate about. Just because seeing your success versus Brian would make me happy, right? I think seeing a lot of companies follow their dreams, follow their paths, and sometimes it's nice to see that, right? The sense of optimism. Um, and I think for the next 5 or 10 years, I definitely want to still be in the space. Gordon and I definitely talked about this, and my other partner, Michael, of course. But we're definitely going to be launching our next fund pretty soon as well. So, And I know Gordon's going to talk a little bit about Unity Angels, but what's really cool about our network as well too is that we're not fixated on one investment class or asset class. So whatever deals or whatever opportunities come as well too, we definitely take a look at as well. Like we recently invested in a Maui hotel, for instance. We're investing in early stage deals. We're investing in everything that's like not a fit for Root and Shoot, but will be a fit for our network.
Wow. I mean, that's awesome. I mean, I definitely see Gordon's story all the time. I see him working on new construction, Airbnbs, rent hotels, startups. So I was like, man, you guys got your feet and everything. I love it. I love the hustle for sure. So, Jonathan, we have one final question for you. And that question is, if you can restart any point of your career, what would you have done differently?
Ooh, that's a really good question, Brian. I think my initial skepticism of crypto led me to be a lot more bearish than I should have been. So I think if I were to restart my career, I think I would have invested a lot more into crypto, a lot more of my net worth. I mean, this is hindsight 2020, but because I was in the industry, I mean, I should have just, went all in, for instance. But I wear my conservative, my finance hat, and I was like, yeah, I'm only going to diversify, 5% to 10% of my portfolio in Bitcoin, and that's it. So I think if I were to restart, I think I would change my investing strategy. I think I'd be a lot more aggressive.
Definitely. I mean, it is a high risk, high reward type of feel, right? And
Hmm.
let's be honest here. Only a few select hand of people would invest over like an X amount into crypto, like back in like 2013, 2014, right? What is this crazy new technology? Like, I don't know. As you said, right? Hindsight 2020. Looking back, it's like, oh, I should have done that. But honestly, the way I view it, it's like you invest whenever you're ready because there's always gonna be more opportunity that will come your way.
That's so true, Brian. Yeah, yeah. And that's why I don't really regret anything that I've done in the past. Everything's a learning experience. Everything is a new chapter. And you always push forward because if you dwell on the past, you're never going to really be able to push yourself or to get yourself out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. So, Jonathan, how can our listeners find out more about you and reach out to you online?
Yeah, yeah. So please check out our website, rs.ventures, or if you guys are interested in learning more about VC or learning more about the fundraising process, as AAPI founders, or like as if you guys do need any help, we'd be more than happy to help. So you can shoot me an email at jonathan@rs.ventures. And please, yeah, I'm definitely available for a call.
Definitely. We'll include all that in the show notes. And thank you so much for your time today, Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Brian, for this.
Of course.